Hello everyone. Today we are going to see how to programmatically load cloud files like S3 into Google Colab using dynamic configurations or graphically through input widgets. So here we are in our notebook. I have installed Boto3 to connect to S3 and ipywidgets to create text input widgets inside the notebook so that we can pass the keys and configurations during runtime. And this install is going to be silent because I have passed the quiet flag to the pip install. If you guys want to see the logs while they are installing, you can just remove this and you can see all the logs as the installation is happening. So first thing, I have created everything as dynamic as possible into classes, and I have used most of the Pythonic constructs to build this utility. This is a part of a bigger picture that I'm working on, so I am actually recording the progress as I'm going through so that this can be useful for others. So first I'm doing is I have created a class called config setup. This will set up the configuration to connect to S3 using the configurations from the conf.ini file. I have a conf.ini file in the file scope. This file have access key and access secret. These I have created from my AWS console by going to IAM, and I have clicked on users and I have created a user and I have created an access key. This access key have complete S3 access, so I can read and write files from S3 and to S3 as I have this access key and secret. So these are in this conf.ini file. So I am using this config parser library of Pythons to read this conf.ini file and parse through the configurations of this file. So the config parser is the class which is part of this library. Through config parser we can actually read the app config file. So here you have to pass the file name where your configurations reside. That I'll be doing as we go along. So this is just a structuring, and this is kind of a skeleton of the class which does everything for us dynamically. So with the config parser setup done, I have created one more method called get s3config. This will actually read the section and the tag. So AWS will be the section, access key will be the tag for this parser file. So what I'm doing is config read is our config parser read where we are referencing the config file. So using this config read, we are calling the get method to this section AWS, and the tag whichever we want. I'll be passing the tags twice, one for AWS key and one for access secret, and I'm just adding the strip to remove any spaces and make it more verbose. And I'm returning this configuration. This will return the value of this key whichever we are actually asking the config parser to get it for us. So this is the config setup for our dynamic configuration read. So with this I'm going to the next step where I'm setting up for the Boto3 configurations, where we need S3 client to connect to AWS console, and we can read the data through that client. So to connect to the client and to read, we need the bucket. So I'm creating the initial base class which is init method, and I'm giving the bucket as the input parameter for this class. And with that I am creating a method called s3 client. This will create s3 client for us, which is nothing but the boto3.client, and the type of resource that we want to access is s3, and this method expects 3 to 4 values. One is key id, access key, session id, and one more which is depending on if you're working for organizational account or personal account. Since mine is personal AWS account, I am only using key and secret. So these things will be read through this config setup and will be passed to this S3 client in the next step. So this will return the client object for us through which we can connect to S3 directly. So this is one part which will be reused in other parts of our code as we go along. So here we have inline process which will read the data from our conf.ini file. So if we can see here, the inline process will expect bucket name. So we have self.bucket equal to bucket. This is fine, and we are calling the Boto3 setup from this config setup, Boto3 setup from this class. So we are naming it setup as a variable, and we are calling that Boto3 setup and passing the bucket whichever we passing to this inline process. So this bucket will be in turn passed to this Boto3 setup, and it will flow upwards. As we can see the hierarchy, right? In the tree structure, it goes upwards and it processes at the top, and it will return the responses downwards. So with this Boto3 setup, I'm calling the config setup after the Boto3 setup call, which will take the file name where our configurations reside, and this file will actually have, this is a class which will have our get s3 config method. So on top of the config setup, I'm calling get s3 config with the section and the tag. This will return us the values of this key and the secret into these variables, access key and access secret, and I'm passing these two variables into the read file method, which is nothing but the setup, which is our Boto3 setup, which have our s3 client. So our s3 client is expecting access key and access secret, which I'm passing it here. Those are from the initialization method. I'm passing them here, and this will actually instantiate the client object. Using this client object, we can call the get object method by passing the bucket name and the file name that we want to read, and by just parsing the responses body, we can get the data into this contents variable, and we can return it. If there is any error, I'm simply logging as an except. I've just wrapped everything into try except, and I have simply added some print lines to make sure that I will get to know what is happening if it is not working. And I have added one more method called list bucket, just to, if I want to read more than one file, I can simply list the files and I can pass the files back to the read file method and read them in loop. So this is only for my convenience, which I'm using list objects v2 method of the client, the Boto3 client. Rest all is exactly the same the way we did. So if we call this method, and we can instantiate it by calling inline process. So this is an inline process class, and I'm passing the bucket name. So if we go to my s3, I have the bucket Kaggle stocks competition, and here I have all these files. So I'm just passing the bucket name. So this will instantiate the inline process class, and it will put that class object into the files variable, and through files I can call the method read file or list bucket. I'm calling read file, and I want to read the file train.csv, which is of 600 MB. It's up to you. You just have to rename this variable names here, and you can read the files directly just by replacing these variables. And I can read now this data into a pandas data frame just by calling the read csv to the train file, which is nothing but our response body content that we received from the Boto3 client. And this will display the head of our data frame in a while. It would take a few seconds since the file size is of 600 MB. Let's give it a time. Yeah, so we have our data frame, and we can use this for next downstream processing and perform ETA, like exploratory data analytics or training, which I'm going to do, and I'll post those videos as well as we go along. So this is how we can read files from a configuration file. I use this because I'm going to introduce ML flow as I go along. I'm going to switch to local development. This I'm only doing to perform EDA and little bit of data pre-processing and stuff. So that's why I'm doing it in the notebook. I have this method created for me, but inside the notebook it would be better if we can directly pass the configurations into the input box, and we can directly call the method and read the data. So for that convenience, I have created this widget process. This is our inline process which reads from conf.ini. This widget process actually reads it from the widgets like this input boxes, which is part of the ipywidgets library. So this process is again straightforward. It's exactly the way how we did in the last class. So here I have my init method, which doesn't take anything. This widget process will not take any input values. So I have 4 inputs that I want to pass to the Boto3 client, right? Bucket, file name, access key, and access secret. So I have created 4 text widgets, and these text widgets have no values and they are not disabled. If you make this true, then you can't input anything into these fields. It will be grayed out. So I have made it false, and I have given a description which will be displayed in front of this widget text boxes. So these are my 4 input text widgets, and I have my Boto3 setup class. Again, I have recalled the Boto3 setup class from the above, as we have declared earlier. I'm gonna pass the bucket to this method. So whatever we pass into this input widget, that will be picked and passed to this Boto3 setup class, and we are calling this self.setup. And I'm using this IPython display libraries display method to display all our widgets inside the notebook. If we don't call this, we will not see these input boxes. So we need this in place in order to see these input boxes and input the necessary information. And the other 2 methods are exactly the same, read file and list bucket. Here again the client is S3 client, the client that we have declared above. The only change I'm doing is I'm using self dot the access key method is this access key method will hold the inputs that we pass to these widgets, and if we call dot value method of that access key variable, we can actually access the value of that widget. So I'm just adding this dot value at the end of all the methods that we declared in the last inline process. There is no other change, just I'm adding dot value to read the values from this widgets dynamically instead of this conf.ini pass. And the try except statement is also same, and everything else is also same. So with this instantiation, if I call the widgets process, I have this 4 input widgets. If I pass access key, secret key, the bucket name, and the file name, let's call train.csv this time, test.csv. Since we have test.csv, right, let's call that file. And I just have to call this method now, contents. Okay, I'm sorry, I've actually used file name as bucket name and bucket name as file name. Let's run this now, and it should hold the response in this variable, and we can pass this to the pd.readcsv. And if I call the data frame head method, since this is a small file, we got the test file head. And yeah guys, this is how you can programmatically read files from Boto3, and you can actually use this widgets to load data during the runtime without any hassle, and you don't have to continuously reinstantiate this Boto3 client method and pass the bucket name or file name or any other loops. You can list the bucket and read multiple files at once using the read file method, or you can use read file to read a single file and like perform operations on top of that file. I hope this was useful, and this would be helpful for your work or your personal projects. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Please do subscribe to the channel if you liked it. Bye.